Good morning on behalf of the host, Interpol, UN Women and UNODC. I'd like to welcome all distinguished guests to a launch of a report on women in law enforcement in the ASEAN region here at the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand. And also welcome our audience that join us online via Zoom and Facebook live streaming as well. I've heard that there's almost 200 registers to join online. So welcome everyone. Since 2018, UNODC and UN Women have joined forces to support women in law enforcement with a focus on women in law enforcement at the border transit points to combat trafficking in women and girls. And building on this, we have partnered with Interpol to undertake this groundbreaking research on women in law enforcement in the ASEAN region. And this initiative wouldn't have become successful and possible without the generous support from the government of Canada. We are very, very fortunate today to have distinguished representatives from all agencies that took part in this research here with us, and also joining physically from Singapore as well, to have the discussion together. And after the discussion, we'll have the presentation of the key findings of the report by our colleagues from Interpol and UN Women, and followed by Q&A sessions that we would take from the floor here and also from online. So for those who join online, please type in the chat box to send us some question. And the last session, which is also very interesting, is that we would hear from a police officer from Cambodia and the Philippines. She will come and share with us about how does this report resonate with them. So stay tuned for that. Without further ado, may I now please introduce our distinguished representative here. This is my greatest honor to welcome Her Excellency Dr. Sarah Taylor, Ambassador of Canada to Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Sawadee ka. Next to her, we have Mr. Jeremy Douglas, UNODC Regional Representative for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. We have Mr. Muhammad Nasiri, UN Women Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. And we have representative from Royal Thai Police, Police Lieutenant Colonel Amonrat Wattana Kosi. She's an instructor at Training Center of Provincial Police Region 5 of the Royal Thai Police. And we also have joining us from Singapore, Mr. Jorge Feinstein de Gastel, Acting Director, Capacity Building and Training Directorate from Interpol Global Complex for Innovation. And I think we can switch to Mr. Jorge, that joining us from Zoom now. Let me now start with the first question that I would like to address to you. We know that policing is often associated with a male-dominated profession. As a police officer yourself and also a senior leader in the profession, how and why do you believe that this research is important, and how could it contribute to the change the character and the image of the profession? Mr. Jorge.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And if your community is 50-50, then your force must also be 50-50. How would we be able to address female concerns if we didn't have female officers? How would we train our recruits if we don't have female teachers? The Women in Law Enforcement in ASEAN research paper concludes with this quote from a police officer in Brunei. It sounds simple and makes so much sense. Yet we have a long way to go to make gender balance in our profession a reality. Globally, it is estimated that only 10% of police are female, and in ASEAN, 6 to 20%. Even fewer reach the highest ranks. The reasons for this are complex, rooted in history, stereotypes, and society at large. Last week, for instance, when Googling for the image for this presentation of a police officer, women were only 10% of the top results. That was despite of Googling from a country where double that percentage work in the police. Yet we can change this. We can change the character and image of our profession. Reflecting the communities we serve, certainly is something that we must do. This report is one important step towards that change, adding to many already taken in the region. It bridges data gaps so we can see where the needs are, and it provides as well recommendations so we can see how to meet those needs. And it shares success stories of female officers so that we can learn and draw inspiration from them. There is the story, for instance, of the police officer awarded a medal for her part in seizing over 60 kilograms of drugs. Or, if I remember, a police officer who brought together communities in counter-insurgency efforts. Or an officer who helped identify the rapist of a 5-year-old girl. The list is long, spanning from different countries and crime areas. And although the data, recommendations, and stories are specific to the region, many resonate elsewhere. It made me reflect on the situation in other regions and organizations as well. I'm sure that the report and the discussion today will also make all of you reflect and serve as an inspiration to make changes, however big or small. For that, I would like to thank the 193 women and men that many of them are here today, who dedicated precious time to speak to the researchers and provide their insights. Thank you also to UN Women and UNODC for embarking with us on this joint endeavor and sharing with us your expertise in this field. And finally, thank you, the Government of Canada, for your generous funding, making the report possible. The report is already helping us. At Interpol, designing targeted initiatives to support this region is part of our endeavor. It is also helping us design similar studies and initiatives in other regions to help to boost the participation of female officers. By forming a global picture of women in law enforcement and helping boost their participation, we contribute to ensuring that the world is a safer place for all, not just for 50%, step by step.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jorge. Now I would like to direct the next question to the UN Women, Mr. Mohammed. From UN Women perspective, how important is the meaningful advancement of women in law enforcement in your perspective?
Thank you, Chaya. And maybe to start with what Jorge mentioned in his opening remarks about the female police officer who have worked with the 5-year-old raped young girl. And when we interviewed her in that report, she said that she managed to first build a trust rapport with this very, very young girl. And through that trust rapport, the young girl has opened up and the police officer has managed to identify the perpetrator. Imagine that. So it's one story of many, but also one among very, very few. Because law enforcement almost everywhere, and we've been talking about that earlier, is still very far from diverse. More diverse law enforcement creates more trust with the community they serve. It is a reflection of the people they aim to protect. And of course, a woman who has experienced sexual violence will feel more comfortable opening up to another woman. None of us can imagine the trauma that this 5-year-old girl has gone through. The report shows us that women participate in law enforcement, and when they do that, the overall effectiveness of law enforcement improves, increasing the representation and role of women in policing is effective at reducing the incidence of sexual-based violence. It builds trust within the community and increases the legitimacy, which in turn can diffuse tensions. Yet, despite this, and as with everything pertaining to gender equality, it is still an uphill battle. Harmful gender norms remain in place and serve as barriers to women joining law enforcement and moving up the ranks. I will be the first to admit, growing up, we never played cops and robbers with girls. Policing was reserved for men. It's dangerous. It requires physical stamina, requires someone to be tough, non-emotional, all things that women and girls are not, except that they are. I dare say that any female police officer is tougher than me, stronger than me, and has more grit than me. I also dare say that emotional intelligence, the ability to sympathize, qualities often attributed to women, are qualities we should strive for across law enforcement in men and women. If men are regarded as solely responsible for ensuring the security of our societies, this is an impossible burden to bear. The intensity and pressures on boys not to cry are too much. We must recognize this and we must address it. The report makes clear that the lack of women in law enforcement is not because a lack of interest. We must ensure that enabling environment is created, one that respects, cherishes, and values diversity. The Women, Peace and Security agenda revolutionized the way we look at security and law enforcement. As highlighted by women law enforcement officials in this report, combating crime is about more than physical strength. It is about intelligence gathering, analytical skills, and comprehensive investigative practices. For example, deploying women police officers to combat insurgencies and counterterrorism can be more effective than military responses due to their presence in and contact with local communities. As some of the Filipino local police officers told us in the interviews leading to this report, they contributed to combating the insurgencies by working closely with local communities and organizing women's groups, diffusing conflict and tensions. A personal experience that I had myself is when I went to the Deep South a few months ago here in Thailand, and so that many of the women law enforcement officers work very, very closely with the communities over there. I believe that the ASEAN region can truly be a world leader on gender-inclusive law enforcement. We can change this trajectory. In doing so, create more just, more peaceful, and more prosperous societies. Thank you, Interpol. Thank you, Odyssey, for this amazing collaboration together. The government of Japan, who supported us in the first phase of the work, and last but not least, also the government of Canada, without which we would not have been able to be here today. You're a global leader on gender equality and on women, peace and security. In conclusion, I would like to salute all the women in law enforcement in the region. Those of you who have defied stereotypes, who have saved lives, who are trailblazers so that little girls grow up playing cups too. I know the road is not always easy. I know breaking into what is a boys' club seems impossible sometimes, but you do it. And time again, women step up, show up, and lead. I am humbled to follow your leadership and honored to be working alongside you as you proudly wear your uniforms, make your communities safer by showing that diversity matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. And yes, and Mr. Jorge as well has resonated, highlight that we showcase in our report that a significant contribution of women in law enforcement to improve response in sexual and gender bias crime, and also can build community trust as well. Now we would like to give the floor to Mr. Jeremy. And the question for UNODC is that we have heard that UNODC has a long history working with police and law enforcement in the region. And this work has been ongoing to address a range of crime. And this initiative is quite different from the past. How will UNODC make use of this finding and insight to advise and help the region?
Thanks, Chaya, and thank you, Mohammed, for setting the stage. Thank you very much. That's a great speech, and thank you, Jorge, in Singapore, particularly, and very much our good colleague Aman Rat, with whom we work closely from time to time, into Canada, and to Ambassador Taylor for making time to be here today, and for the financial support to ourselves and young women and to Interpol. It's incredibly important work that Canada has sponsored, and we're very appreciative of that. Thank you. And of course, to the 200 law enforcement officers that participated in this study across the region. Big thanks to them, and to the 200 plus that are watching online right now, and those that have made it here today, thank you. So building on what my colleagues have said, Mohammed and Jorge, I'd emphasize the benefits, I think, that this report, a report of this nature, can offer in a slightly different way. In many ways, what we're thinking about, based on our work addressing some serious forms of crime, people like Aman Rat that do that on a day-to-day basis, or help their colleagues to do it. And as they've, Jorge nicely said, you know, it's important to get to parity, to that 50% mark. And as Mohammed said, the 10% globally is amazing. And in this region, we have some forces that aren't even at the global average of, say, 10%. But there's undeniably, set aside from the equity argument, there are huge practical benefits to law enforcement to implement a parity approach. Women make up half of the population, or a little bit more, in fact, in many countries. And they're sources of intelligence, social intelligence, criminal intelligence. And this is where, this is the reality globally, but it's also the reality here in ASEAN. And if the law enforcement organizations do not represent the broader community, will the community confide in them? Much like that 5-year-old girl that Mohammed touched on. A terrible crime was committed against her. Thankfully, she was able to confide, and she was able to share her experience. And of course, then people, the perpetrators, can be brought to justice. But imagine if there are people not sharing information with the police. So if they share vital information, they share intelligence, policing will be more successful. And this is the people that the police are meant to counter: traffickers, organized crime. They count on silence. I think that's a very key thing here. They count on silence to commit crime. It empowers them, in fact, because they need that. And there are benefits, both immediate, so the helping, the identification of victims, the confiding, the sharing of information, and violent and dramatic crime. But there's also the information of likely involvement in criminality that women can share with the police. They know their communities often much better than the men, because the men are off doing different things. So practically bringing about that balance and empowering women in law enforcement can benefit the countries of ASEAN, which prioritizes, I would say, transnational crime. It's a feature of so many of the political discussions of this region, and particularly drug trafficking. But to counter the crimes which this region is prioritizing itself, you need intelligence. You need your community to share information with you. And if they will not communicate, then is ASEAN going to be successful? Is the SOMTC aims and objectives, the ASAD aims and objectives, going to be successful? One could argue not as successful as they should be. And at the same time, and I think this is where, and Mohammed made an extremely good point, women bring incredible talents to the table. Especially, I have noticed in my career, in the analytical space, the intelligence space. They make brilliant intelligence analysts, in fact, and investigators for a variety of reasons, including because the work assigned, they often have access to information, they sift through that information. But very rarely do they serve in intelligence roles. When I meet with the officials of the various police forces of the region, you meet intelligence officials, it's almost invariably men. So again, the access to the information, but also those capacities. And let's be honest, if the law enforcement agencies are not using the national talents and those key talents, they will not be successful in countering serious organized crime. The beneficiaries, again, are the criminals. So that's a bit of a departure, I think, from my colleagues, but I think it's important to emphasize the operational and practical benefits that come from this equity and this approach. And it should be very much for that reason, if no other reason, a priority for this region. that they want to address the crimes which they prioritize and they discuss as caring about. And the situation here is dramatic on transnational crime. I just touch on the fact that, even yesterday, Thailand seized 2 tons of drugs in Kanchanaburi. And now imagine all of the drugs that move through the country, are they actually aware of them? Because there's a community sharing that information. So going forward, how will we use this? We will use this with our counterparts, with agency chiefs, with ministers, to emphasize the benefits I mentioned, to advocate intensely for this, and to try to push policy boundaries. And I think that's the power of this study. We can really get it on the desks of policy leaders to get them paying attention to this need. And again, the practical benefits can come out. The need for that, confiding and so forth can come out. It will not sit on a shelf. So again, I would really like to thank Mohammed for the partnership, Jorge for the partnership, the Royal Thai Police, and especially Amarat, and you, Ambassador Taylor, thank you, and to Canada and the many dedicated officers, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, for emphasizing that combating crime and transnational organized crimes more than just strains, and women can also feel in the part that intelligence gathering and information sharing as well. Now we have heard that to serve the community that is 50-50, we also need police force that also 50-50. How would we be able to serve the community if we don't have like 50-50 force in police organization? So with this, Police Lieutenant Colonel Amonrat, you are also an instructor yourself and working directly with training. And our report also highlight the importance of the training as well. How important is it, in your opinion, to have female instructor in the agency, and also what's the career path look like?
All right. As I am the female instructor, I think it is really important for the RTP, the Royal Thai Police, to have more female instructor, because we police, we don't only enforce, but we serve community as well. If we have more female instructor to train and to motivate the trainees to have the service mind and to become the beloved police in the community, I think that would be good for the Royal Thai Police, that we have no bad attitude toward the police force. And I think the female, we do concern about the police, the use of force. I think we can prevent the violence when we have to have the crisis or the situation, or we have the hard time. If the female instructor train the trainee to think about the community is their family, that would be the good solution for the police force. I don't know, it might be the my opinion. I'm not sure that other people will agree with me or not. And for the advancement, I think for the female police, we should have the career path like based on the gender equality. Any female police instructor who is smart, strong, supportive, and have education, have qualified education, they can become the police colonel in the future. This is what I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we would also want to hear from the government of Canada who made this report possible. Ambassador Taylor, as Canada is the main supporter of this research, why Canada think it's important to support the creation of the new body of knowledge about women in law enforcement, especially in the context of ASEAN?
Thank you for the question, and very pleased to be here to support the issuance of this report. And I'd like to commend the work of colleagues at Interpol, at UN Women, at UNODC, as well as partners in the Royal Thai Police and other regional police forces for the good work that they've done in this area. And I should say, I'm going to talk to you in answer to the question about the Government of Canada's policy on women in peace and security. But I'd like to start by saying this is also something I really wanted to support from a personal perspective. Because, and this maybe to speak to particularly some of the women police officers who were involved in the training and in this report. I also have the experience of being in a profession that has tended in the past to be male dominated. When I joined the foreign ministry, we had a handful of women ambassadors. Now Canada is close to having 50% of our heads of mission be women abroad. And that's something I'm very proud that we've achieved. So I want to say, and going back to our conversation earlier, that even if the numbers within the police community are low, don't give up hope. It takes a concerted effort, but it is possible to move the needle forward on participation of women. So, as I said, not only from a personal perspective, but also from a Government of Canada perspective, this for us is really part of our feminist foreign and international assistance policies. So we put a huge value on the contribution of women and girls to all parts of society, including, of course, in this instance, law enforcement. And this project was a natural fit for us because it's also part of our cooperation with ASEAN communities more broadly. We have been working together with ASEAN and with UN partners on a series of cooperative projects to try and ensure that our communities are secure and that our borders are safer and more effective. And we think that in all of these cases, working in partnership is the most effective approach to partnership. So that's one of the reasons why we contributed the $2 million support to the research and then to the training that was associated with it. More specifically on this project, we're supporting it because we believe that inclusive law enforcement is better law enforcement. So we encourage in Canada and in our partners a diversity of gender, ethnicity, a religious and other backgrounds amongst our officers. And that's partly because a gender-specific approach at all stages throughout the criminal justice response helps us to address the needs of women and girls. And as pointed out by several of the speakers, that's over 50% of society. So obviously, as a domain that is supposed to serve society, it's important that it reflects society and that law enforcement be aware of the needs and concerns of women and girls. And in addition, and again, several speakers have touched on this, raising gender awareness and responsiveness in law enforcement also helps us to evolve and to go beyond traditional approaches to law enforcement. So to improve law enforcement more generally. And I think I was interested to hear Lieutenant Colonel and Jeremy both speak to the role of, and Mohammed for that matter, how women officers can bring intelligence skills and empathy to policing. But I would say, going back to your cops and robbers analogy, don't forget the physical toughness element as well. Anybody who says women aren't tough enough to be a police officer clearly have never given birth. Particularly not without anesthetics. So for me, I think it's a question of how you view the issue. So there really is strength in diversity. Different approaches to law enforcement that are brought by female officers with different perspectives, help in investigation, help better understand and protect victims of crime, and ultimately help police forces do what they're there for, which is to better protect our societies. So that kind of diversity helps in countries around the world, including, of course, in the ASEAN region, to better tackle all sorts of criminal activity, including some areas that disproportionately affect women as victims as well. So it's important for victims to be part of the solution to the problems like human smuggling, sex trafficking, and domestic abuse, where, again, they form a large proportion of victims. But even in some areas that we don't traditionally associate with women, and Jeremy spoke a bit to this, like drug smuggling, there's an important in having women involved there. And I understand, I think from an interview you'd given earlier, Jeremy, that there's an increasing, in fact, a disproportionate number of women prisoners being convicted for relatively minor drug offenses in the region. So again, that points to the importance of having a diverse and balanced enforcement to address that issue. So that's just, I think, another example, concrete example of how law enforcement benefits by having more women involved. And we've recognized that in Canada as well. So we like to walk our own talk, if you like. In fact, our national police force, the famous Royal Canadian Mounted Police, them with the red serge jackets and the musical ride, they are now led by a very formidable woman, our RCMP Commissioner, Brenda Lucky. So that's great, but we recognize we still have a way to go. I think as everybody in the community does. So we see this as a starting point. And this report gives us that starting point, an excellent starting point. Now we need to move towards implementation. Implementation will take effort, we recognize, and a lot of commitment and strong partnerships. So I just want to end by saying that we really look forward to continuing to work on this journey. This is just the start, not the completion. So with Southeast Asian partners and also with Interpol, with UN Women, with UN ODC. If we continue learning about the role of women in law enforcement in Southeast Asia, then I think that will be a great way to move us forward on this journey. And I just want to assure you of Canada's continued support for ASEAN's efforts, including the senior officials meeting on transnational crime, but also all the efforts that are being carried out amongst the law enforcement units in the region. So we want to be there with you as you work to build more diverse police forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks again for the support that the government of Canada has been giving to the region so for us to have a more inclusive law enforcement. And this report, of course, is an evidence-based report, a starting ground for us to develop and work forward into the future, into implementation and the initiative for the new activities. Now, I'm sure some of you may have questions, but please prepare it after the presentation of the key finding. We will have to move next to hear some key findings from the report, and it will be presented by our colleagues. First, Ms. Irina Dalmeida, Senior Gender Affairs Expert from Interpol, and we also have Ms. Gail Demolish, Program Specialist from UN Women. And I think that it's best to start the sessions through the power of the animated video that has highlighted some key findings from the report. So we'll start with the video for a few minutes, and then I'll welcome Irina on the screen from Singapore. Thank you.
More women in law enforcement, a necessity for ASEAN communities. Women police help build trust within communities. They're able to solve crimes thanks to their ability to obtain different information than male officers. Increasing the role of women in policing has proven to be effective in reducing the incidence of gender-based violence.
We are proficient at gathering intelligence, and we excel at investigations.
Women are great police officers. They can be strong leaders in the community, building trust and bringing a wide range of skills.
Oh my, now that's what I call great teamwork.
Tackling a challenging situation is about skills, not strength.
However, the percentage of women in law enforcement in Asian countries remains relatively low. While some Asian countries are making efforts to promote the role of women in law enforcement, more can be done. Discriminatory practices that prevent women from considering law enforcement as a career need to end. For instance, in some countries, women have to remain unmarried for several years after graduating. This rule does not apply to men.
Women should always be given the opportunity to apply their skills and knowledge in operational roles.
One way to achieve that is by taking part in deployments and modern policing functions.
We also need more women to lead and command, becoming role models for next generations.
A regional strategy and country-specific action plans for gender-responsive law enforcement institutions and monitor their progress would be great. We need the skills of men and women to better protect men, women, boys, and girls, and to bring peace and security to our communities.
Law enforcement is a career for all.
Now I would give the floor to Irina from Singapore to start with the presentation of the key finding.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to me to present to you today the key findings of this research conducted over the past year. And I will build on what has already been mentioned by the distinguished panelists. So I will start first by briefly with what we aim to do when we started this research and a few words about the methodology we used. I will afterwards present some of the key findings on recruitment, training, deployment, promotion, and resources. And as the moderator mentioned, my UN Women colleague Gaëlle Demolis will conclude with the key recommendations. At the onset of starting working on this topic, we knew, based on research that was conducted in other contexts, that increasing gender equality in law enforcement contributes to better address public safety and security, both at the national level as well as to tackle transnational crime. And this was exemplified, and panelists have also mentioned this topic. So the meaningful participation of women in law enforcement has been actually globally acknowledged as vital to promoting gender equality and increasing the operational effectiveness of law enforcement. As the nature of policing, of crime, and of criminal investigations continues to evolve, increased attention is being given to the gender dimensions of criminal conduct, victim impacts, and the operational capabilities that law enforcement agencies require to analyze, investigate, and combat crimes at the local and transnational levels. I hope with this I have painted the general outlook for this presentation and answered the question of why research into this topic is important and why we, the three organizations present here today, we undertook this study. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This study is the first of its kind to gather comprehensive information on this topic in the region and to explore the experiences of views of women officers. In particular, the study aimed to investigate, identify, and inform. So first of all, to investigate what are the policies and practices on recruitment, training, deployment, promotion, human resources with regards to women police officers. Secondly, to identify relevant institutional frameworks which facilitate or hinder gender equality in relation to women's participation in law enforcement. And last but not least, the analysis of the findings based on the interviews with officers formed the basis for recommendations regarding how best to mitigate these challenges. And actually it aims to inform the targeted intervention by our three organizations, but also by other international, regional, or national actors, which is why we hope it will be a resource that can be widely used and will be also translated in various languages in the region, from the region. So if we can move to the next slide, please. I will just briefly speak about the methodology that we used to develop this study, which included desk review of key publications, strategies, action plans. We also have used a short questionnaire to collect demographic and occupational data from the officers that contributed their views. We have organized structured, semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions with 193 officers from the region. And our colleagues from UNODC and UN Women, in addition, have organized consultations in a select number of countries that brought together law enforcement agencies, civil society organizations, and development partners. And they have also organized for a study visit to the all-women police station in the Philippines. So next slide, please. You have on the screen the percentage of women law enforcement officers in the region. And as you can see, and as it was mentioned also in the animated video, the percentage of women remains relatively low, and available statistics indicate they comprise between approximately 6% and 20% of law enforcement workforces. However, as the ambassador said, numbers do not paint the entire picture. There has been significant progress with regards to the development of, to the deployment of women across a range of functions in the police. And women are today, more than ever before, present and making their presence felt in a variety of roles in the law enforcement career. We can move to the next slide, please. So on training, on recruitment. Almost all law enforcement agencies in the region have allowed women to join their respective police academies and training colleges. And most countries have quotas or targets for women recruitment or overall representation that is typically somewhere between 10 to 30%. So what contributed to this increase in the past, in the recent past? Is legislation or internal policies that require women officers to deal with cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And the panelists have given several examples. Legislation that requires female prison guards in women prison, or female bodyguards for high-ranking female government representatives. And actually such policies have created a space for women to access the law enforcement career. And to answer this need, several police forces have organized targeted recruitment campaigns where they have recruited hundreds and in some cases thousands of female officers. Another element that contributed is to women joining the profession is also standard admission criteria for both men and women in police academies and training colleges that ensures women have equal chances to enter the profession. However, the officers we have spoken to also identified several challenges that persist when trying to access the law enforcement career. And one of the most important reasons appears to be the use of the quota system. And gender quotas often appear to be used not as a temporary special measure, but as a ceiling for regulating women's access to the profession, which sets a limit to how many female officers can be recruited in any given year. Furthermore, there are also some cases where there are requirements for women only admission conditions still. There was one portrayed in the video being unmarried either at the time of the application or to remain unmarried for several years after graduating from training, or in some cases the necessity to undergo virginity tests. This can be stumbling blocks for women trying to access the career. And finally, as my colleague from UNODC has mentioned, one other area that we investigated closely was training on human rights and gender equality. We know that continuous training is key to ensuring a professional police force with the knowledge and skills needed to address the various situations faced on the ground. However, training on gender equality and human rights did not appear to be available or compulsory in many instances. Furthermore, female officers reported having fewer opportunities to attend international trainings, for example, which might mean that they have less opportunities to develop their professional skills. They are to be exposed to international best practices or to expand their networks, which are all important elements in an officer's career's path. Next slide, please. Looking at the deployment of female officers, the 184 female officers who participated in this study were deployed to a variety of specializations. And they have testified that throughout the years, progress has been made towards training and deploying women to a wider range of duties and specialist tasks, both at junior and mid-level ranks. And it was already mentioned that when deployed, female and male officers testified that women bring added value to law enforcement work. First of all, it improves the operational effectiveness of the agency. For example, officers reported female law enforcement agents are less aggressive, or at least they are perceived to be so by the public. Subsequently, female officers are perceived to be easier to engage with by the community. Female officers can also perform critical duties that men cannot for cultural or legal reasons. So for example, in many countries, we already have regulations, laws, standard operating procedures that require women to check and search other women or to be present when entering homes and talking to women. Women officers has been already well established, contribute to improved responses to sexual and gender-based violence. And this was actually one of the major drivers for some police services in the region to open their ranks to women and deploy them for operational duties. And you have heard, for example, the story that the UN Women Director shared, the moving testimony of a case of a 5-year-old girl. Increased diversity within law enforcement agencies also contributes to building trust with communities. And finally, women officers, has been said, they contribute to de-escalate tense situations. And I would like to quote here a high-ranking female officer from Cambodia, whom said, "We are indispensable because we work with the community. Women tend to be more effective compared to male counterparts, especially in conflict situations. Men tend to use strength and to solve situations using force. Women are gentler and they calm down potential violent escalations." That is not to say that women also do not possess strength, but also, as the ambassador said as well, but also that they bring other qualities that could be very well useful in the law enforcement force of the 21st century. So more such examples and testimonies are available in the research paper. And however, just to conclude on the deployment, despite investments in recruitment and training female personnel, there are challenges to their full and effective integration in law enforcement with respect in particular to the limited nature of their deployment. And the majority of women continue to appear to be working in administrative positions. In this framework, the role of institutional rules and regulations, good practices, and strong management is crucial in expanding women's deployment opportunities and ensuring all officers are deployed to operational or investigative law enforcement duties regularly throughout their career. If we can move to the next slide, please. Finally, the available data indicates that women are slowly also making their way in larger number in middle management positions in some countries. However, overall, the number remains low. Female leaders were viewed as important because they can challenge the gender stereotypes and contribute to redefining the roles women can fulfill. They were seen as an inspiration for younger generations by showcasing that it is possible to build a career and act as mentors for younger officers, helping them navigate the organization. Younger women police officers also reported they felt inspired and motivated by their female leaders. And women leaders themselves described feeling a responsibility to support and inspire younger generations. Secondly, women leaders were also expected by their fellow female officers to support and represent other women in the police force and bring women's voices and interests to the table, influencing both institutional processes, policies and cultures, and the wider security sector reform discussions. To facilitate the advancement of women at work, temporary special measures such as gender quotas or target can have positive results. These approaches can be an interim measure to break the glass ceiling or overcome barriers faced by women. Mentoring was also something that was associated with career advancement, and mentoring initiatives can help women officers better navigate their policing career, seek advice about life-work balance challenges, and contribute to ensuring there is a steady pipeline of potential female leaders. And last but not least, female leaders believe having a male champion is critical for gaining promotion. Female officers indicated that men's support is essential given that they hold most leadership roles. But they also recognize that the existence of many challenges that hinder their career development, including the career path that women officers have taken, given that the majority of women are working in administrative position, the pipeline of women potentially suitable for management position is low due to their lack of experience in operational policing capabilities, which is considered a key career progression requirement in many cases. Many women also felt closely scrutinized at work and held to very high standards because they were women. And any mistakes made would affect perceptions of their overall job performance, which is not the case with their male colleagues, for example. Other reasons that they mentioned include lack of support from family or spouses to combine work and family commitments, societal expectations about their roles and responsibilities, and less developed networks, all important elements in an officer's career. Next slide, please. So finally, we have also looked into the area of human resources, infrastructure, and facilities, and how they support or hinder women's integration into the law enforcement agencies. So as you can also see on the slide, all countries have an entitlement for maternity leave, although the duration varies. Female officers preferred to have long maternity leave. However, some expressed concern that lengthy entitlements may be seen by others as a disincentive to recruit or promote women. And women's unions or associations are not present in every country. But however, there does not appear to be necessarily a clear relationship between the existence of an association and higher representation of women in law enforcement or at senior ranks due to a range of variables. An association can be effective, however, by providing peer support and making targeted improvements to women's working conditions in some cases. With regards to challenges, as you can see, poor, inadequate, or non-existent facilities for women, such as separate facilities for changing, sleeping, or sanitation, or facilities for new mothers that return working. They deter prospective applicants from considering law enforcement as a possible career. And the study found a clear demarcation between facilities in urban and rural areas which affects women deployment. Other challenges include uniform attire that in some cases restrict women's movement. There is also a lack of flexible or part-time work. Paternity leave is not always available, and very limited replacements are possible for maternity leave. You will find in the research much more details about the issues mentioned and testimonies from police officers, as well as other points that we were not able to cover here today or give sufficient details. And I will be happy to take any further questions you might have on the above mentioned issues or the research paper overall. I would like now to pass the floor to my colleague from UN Women to present the key recommendations.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Irina. I'm pleased to share with you some key recommendations from the report, which will echo what Irina just presented. So first of all, if we can have the PowerPoint on the recommendations on slide 10. In terms of policies and strategies to be implemented at the national level, the report highlights the need to develop or improve gender mainstreaming strategies. And also the women have told us that they really would like to have a body or a structure that receive complaint and investigate complaints related to discrimination and harassment. The second set of recommendations on the next slide, please, is related to recruitment, training and capacity building. So the report recommends to develop or expand campaigns to ensure law enforcement is portrayed as a career for both men and women. So this is why, for instance, we have done the humoristic videos, and we hope that it will reach up to 60,000 people. And also the photo exhibition that we are launching tomorrow, which will portray women law enforcement in action. The other recommendation is related to quota. As we've just mentioned, the issue with quota is that it's seen as a maximum or a ceiling when it should be rather a minimum, and it is used as a temporary measure to ensure that there's a minimum number of women in law enforcement. In addition, the criteria that require women to be unmarried, whether it's when they join the force or whether they have to remain unmarried for several years after they join the force, should also be eliminated because it is a discriminatory practice and a policy which does not apply to men. And we should also ensure that women are represented in recruitment selection committees, and training, whether it is in-country or international training opportunities, should be made available to both women and men. The third set of recommendations on the next slide. And women need to access and to be encouraged to participate in a wide range of operational deployment. Law enforcement agencies should ensure that there are solutions for women who want to be deployed and for men and women who have families to be able to deploy and still have a work-life balance. And finally, on this set of recommendations, female and male officers need to be able to have access to counseling and psychological support, as we can all recognize that is a profession that is not free from stress. The fourth set of recommendation is related to promotion and leadership. So this is a picture of one of the mid-level law enforcement officer that was trained by UN Women UNDC on issues of trafficking. And mid-career female officers such as herself need to benefit from leadership training, technical skills, but also to be mentored. And as we said, mentored sometimes by female officers, but also by male officers who often have the senior positions. And retention has been one of the issues. So we suggested in the report that we should guarantee that women, when they return from maternity leave, are able to return to a comparable position. And in terms of human resources, there are three main recommendations. First, the peer support groups, which we've seen is working very well at the national level. We would like also to see something similar at the regional level, so to have a peer support group at the regional level. Also have more part-time or flexible work arrangements and policies. And similarly, have parental leave, which means also paternity leave entitlement. The final set of recommendations are very practical and are related to infrastructure, facilities, and equipment. So I remember one of the senior officers who told me once that it was very easy to deploy male officers because we just put a hammock and they can go and be deployed. Whereas if you have a female officer, you need to think, oh, where is she going to sleep? Where is she going to go to the bathroom? Where is she going to change? So at the end, it's easier to just deploy men. So it's important that the infrastructure is also gender sensitive and gender responsive, so that there are separate changing, sleeping and sanitation facilities, so that we can give the opportunities to both men and women. And finally, law enforcement agency need to ensure that women have appropriate uniforms for their comfort, safety, and practicality when on duty. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now give the floor back to Sushaya, my other coin, to take questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know there's a lot of key finding and recommendation because the report has been conducting through over a year. So thank you for your attention, and I appreciate Irina and Gael for sharing this information with us. Now I would open the floor to question and answer from participants and audience here. And also, if you're joining online, feel free to send your question through the chat box. The question is, it is a great achievement to collect information from all 10 countries of ASEAN. Is the data comparable across all 10 ASEANs, or are there limitations of the data? So maybe we also have Dr. Melissa Jardine, the lead researcher of this project, with us, and also Mr. Felipe de la Torre, UNODC Border Management Program Coordinator, with us here today to help answering the question. Maybe these questions go to Irina.
Thank you very much, Sucha. And actually, it's a very good question. And I'm glad that I have the opportunity to maybe clarify the slide on statistics, because some caution should be exercised in analyzing these figures, indeed, as they are not quite comparable across all countries. Data on this topic is quite difficult to obtain. So in some countries, we only have estimations of all the women working in law enforcement, or even broader security agencies, while in others we have figures only for commissioned officers and did not include hence figures for non-commissioned officers. But all these disclaimers and clarification about what is included in the data from each country can be found in the report, so that people that are interested can have more information. Thank you.
The last sessions, we would hear a few words from our law enforcement officer who have read this report and would share with us how this report resonated with them quickly. We first have Police Colonel Pisay Khan from the Cambodian National Police. She's a Deputy Chief of Foreign Affairs, Office of Cambodian National Police, joining us online here. A quick question from you after you reflect from the report. As a female officer building your career in your organization, have you encountered any challenge, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer the questions. Several years, or it can be said that 10 years in the experience of being a police officer, I have challenges of different kinds of, I have made different kinds of challenges so as the time is limited, I would like to raise only 2 challenges that I have made so far. It's about physical criteria, and another one is communications. Okay. So firstly, I would like to talk about the physical criteria. As the female officers have been considered as a soft and more sensitive than men, and when we attend in the office, or it can be seem like how could we as a female can work on these areas. So Otherwise, when I started and working as a police officer, I have been assigned as to work in the documents management, administrative arrangements for something like that. But yes, but somehow the productive, or I can say that's the outcome of the work, the job responsibility is seem like not really effective because of the feeling of shame or feeling shame of the being a female officers and working around by men and feel like more shameful. But otherwise, day by day, I have learned that how we should not concern about this one. We should concern about our potential. We have how to encounter with this one. We should be learn about our potential and exposure our potential in the environment of working with the male. So day by day, they will aware of women or other female police officers can work smoothly with the documents as well as outside of the office. And one more important thing job that I have responsible so far is communications. The ways I communicate with the men, or I can say male police officers, is really kind of a bit tough. The way of communicate is not really smoothly because of female officers have a soft voice, but I have learned so far how can I communicate with those male to accept my idea, my point of view, or accept my request. I have to adapt it with how to communicate with those male. So I had to perform more strong, flexible, be clear with my objective to what I'm talking about and what I supposed to receive from them. So this is the most challenges that I have met so far, physical criteria and communication. But as a result, recently I have obtained more experiences and I have encounter with, I had communicate well with male officer because he understand and aware of women can be more effective in communications. So that's it for the question. Everyone can get what I mean.
Thank you very much, Police Colonel Pisay, for your reflections. Last but not least, we have Police Lieutenant Colonel Kimberly Esteban Molitas from the Philippine National Police with us here today. Short question will be, what are the top 2-3 things to consider to be successful in your career, and your reflection from the report? Thank you.
Thank you for the report. It has covered all the things I think that concerns all women police in Asia, and for the efforts that has been put to it by the team. It's very, it resonates a lot with the work that we have been doing here in the Philippines, trying to be able to empower our women police in the country. And so many times we are asked what are the things that we should consider while we build our career in policing. And I think that one of the most important things for women to consider is if this is really the work that they want to do. So law enforcer, I think that's very important. It comes to mind because there are many questions when it comes to women joining the police force. What is your purpose? Why do you want to be here? The policing should not be just an option. It is something that you really should want to do in your life for public service. And for me, that has been my mantra since I got into the police service. It is what has inspired me to stay and focus into this career and build on it. over time. And secondly, I think one of the things that I have observed for our women police is that they have this tendency to step back when there is a louder voice beside them. Even if they have the greatest idea, there will always be the tendency that a woman police steps back because there's a louder voice coming from beside them. And I think that it is about time for women to use their voice to be heard and sit on the table, especially on positions of leadership. The report has mostly mentioned and covered the strengths as well as the weaknesses of our women police. And I hope that this report would be shared to each country so that it will serve as a reference for our law enforcement organizations to review and look at how they would be able to strengthen the participation of women in the police force. And also, I took notice of the number of women in each country. And I think this report, I believe this report would really help our countries realize the much needed addition of women in the police forces. And then last but not the least, I think, is that my friend Chaya, in fact, requested me to wear my uniform today, but I intentionally did not wear it because I also observed that many women, when they get into the police service, they forget that they are women. And I think it's very important that we celebrate being a woman. We should not see our being a woman as a point of weakness, but instead a point of strength, because with that comes the strength of being patient, the strength of being connected to the community. These are the strengths that women have. I hope my male counterparts or the male audience would not feel bad when I say this, but I really think that we have this innate nature of women who we can easily connect with people. So I think that's one of the very important aspects where policing should work, when the police force is able to connect to its community. So I think that that's very important to consider as we go and build our career as women in the police forces.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. That's very powerful statement. And actually, we have a lot of questions. It was a technical error before, but now we're having quite a numbers of questions. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. I'm just going to go for one question that there would direct to our distinguished panelists here. What are some methods that can be used to gain support from male law enforcement for women increased participation?
I think that the point I would often emphasize with my counterparts is if they truly want to be successful against some of the crimes that they're trying to address, then what they need to do is understand the situation in their own country, their own community. And if they don't have full ownership of that, if their force doesn't necessarily reflect that, are they going to be successful? Mm-hmm. And I think we can give them many practical examples. There's the 5-year-old girl who confided, but what about all the other 5-year-old girls or other girls that don't? What about the transnational crime or the terrorism issues? If they want to be successful, and these are top priority issues for this region. The Prime Minister talks about it, the various ministers of the region talk about it, but if they think about results they want to achieve, then they need the intelligence from their countries and from their region. And if they don't have their police force gathering it because they don't reflect the society around them, then they're not going to be successful. So I think that argument is often, or that type of argument might be a little more persuasive in a sense, rather than simply pushing parity. I think that there's a number of arguments you can advance, but I think that one often might resonate within the police force logic. That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak, sorry, I can't speak to police forces specifically, but just in terms of experience that I've seen within government more broadly, and some of the work that we've done within the Foreign Ministry and elsewhere, I think there are three elements I would point to. One is exactly what Jeremy said, that is just to put forward the data. And I think that trend started actually in the private sector. There's now a lot of good data that shows that companies that have more diverse leadership perform better economically. And that study, those studies have then in turn made people in government look at the same issues. And I think this is exactly why this study today is so important, is just to put the data to people to say, if you want to lead a successful organization, you want to deliver results, well, here are the facts that having a more diverse organization means you will do better. You will, especially for the leadership of organizations, who are often those who drive recruitment processes, you're going to look better. You're going to be able to report better results to those you report to if you have a more diverse organization. So that's a very powerful practical argument. There's another argument that was referred to briefly, I think, in the study around equity. I think it's important to make it clear, this isn't just about advancing women, it's about fairness and equity for everyone. And there was reference there to paternity leave as well as maternity leave. I've seen a very interesting evolution in government in Canada. There used to be very limited paternity leave, and we switched over to a system where most of the leave is actually now parental leave. Either parent can take it. I mean, there's a small chunk that is just for the mother to recover from birth, but the rest is for either parent. And there was a bit of a generational shift, but once it became the norm for younger men in our organizations to take parental leave, then sort of suddenly that stopped, like having kids stopped being a women's problem and just became the norm that young staff members have kids, they're going to take leave, everybody does it. And of course, for the young men in our organization, it meant suddenly they were able to spend time with their babies, with their kids in a way they weren't before, because there wasn't that expectation. So that actually everyone benefits. So making sure it's about that equity element. And the last thing I would say is from some of the work I've seen around diversity in organizations, and that some of the final barriers to get over are very tough because they're hidden barriers. They're about unconscious views or views we're only sort of partly aware of in terms of our own biases and our own views about who can do what, who's good at what, how we feel about working with other people. And we all have those because we all grow up in societies that have certain views about, about, you know, men do this, so boys play cops and robbers and girls play house. So we've all grown up with that. And the most interesting thing for me from some of the work that's been done and how do you address that in an organization, in an institution, is that the best way to fix it is actually by doing it, by proximity. That people will hold those sorts of stereotypical views, especially if they haven't had the experience of working with the groups they have the stereotypes about. Once you start having, say, more women police officers, you create a virtuous cycle where once male police officers work with female colleagues and see that, oh, hey, you know, they can do lots of things. And also, these are my friends and my colleagues. That helps to overcome those stereotypes. And the stereotypes tend to be strongest in organizations that don't have the diversity. So it's the challenge of getting started, but once you get started, the good news is then again, you create this virtuous cycle within the organization that the more people have the experience of diversity, the more they embrace it and the more it just starts to become normal for them to have a diverse range of colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And there's a lot of questions, but I'm sure we'll carry on the conversations after this launch of the report. It's very interesting session from our discussion. And also, the report is also available online. The link has been shared in the chat box from those who are joining online. And on behalf of all the hosts here, UNODC, UN Women, and Interpol, I would like to thanks distinguished guests here and also all the audience that joining us here and also online. Thank you very much and looking forward to meet you in the next initiative. Thank you very much.